Hey guys! Tonight we're stepping into the workshop of America's most famous inventor, where the smell of hot metal and electrical sparks fills the air. You can almost hear the hum of experimental devices and see the warm glow of early incandescent bulbs casting long shadows across wooden workbenches. This is the world of Thomas Edison, a man whose name adorns school textbooks and whose inventions literally illuminated our world. But beneath the polished portrait of America's favorite genius lies a tale so complex and at times disturbing that you might find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about the Wizard of Menlo Park. And fair warning, once you learn about Edison's darker maneuvers, you might never look at a light switch the same way again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing that this little sleepy community spans across continents and time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in Milan, Ohio on February 11, 1847, as a midwife hands Nancy Edison her seventh child, a boy they name Thomas Alva Edison. The house is modest, the town small, and there's absolutely nothing to suggest that this particular child will one day hold over 1,000 patents and become perhaps the most influential American inventor of all time. If you could whisper into Nancy's ear about her son's future fame, she would likely dismiss it as especially given what's to come. By age 7, young Al, as his family calls him, displays a curiosity that borders on obsession. You watch as he questions everything, takes apart any mechanism he can get his hands on, and conducts crude experiments in his family's. His teachers, however, are less impressed. After just 3 months of formal schooling, his teacher reportedly dismisses him as addled, too confused or mentally disorganized to benefit from education. Historians still debate whether this teacher actually used these exact words, or if this story was embellished later to enhance Edison's self-made mythology. But what's certain is that his formal education ends abruptly. Nancy Edison, convinced of her son's intelligence, decides to homeschool him instead. You observe her teaching him reading, writing, and arithmetic at their kitchen table, while his father Samuel introduces him to great literature. The boy devours books on natural philosophy and chemistry, showing particular interest in works like R.G. Parker's School of Natural Philosophy and Newton's Principia. What's fascinating and often overlooked in simplified biographies is that around this time, Edison begins experiencing hearing problems. After a bout of scarlet fever and recurring untreated ear infections, the young boy's hearing deteriorates. Some accounts also mention an incident where a train conductor lifted him by his ears onto a train car, potentially causing additional damage. By his teens, Edison is almost completely deaf in one ear and has significant hearing loss in the other. Rather than viewing this as a disability, you notice something remarkable. Edison later claims his deafness was actually an advantage, allowing him to concentrate deeply without distraction. "My deafness has not been a handicap, but a help," he once said. "It has saved me from having to listen to a lot of worthless chatter." This early adaptation to adversity hints at the determined, sometimes stubborn character that would drive his later innovations and conflicts. As you watch young Edison grow into his early teens, another pattern emerges. While most children his age are playing or attending school, he's already developing an entrepreneurial spirit that will define his career. At just 12 years old, he convinces his parents to let him work selling newspapers, snacks, and candy on the Grand Trunk Railroad running between Port Huron and Detroit. This isn't just a childhood job, it's his first business venture. On these train journeys, Edison sets up a small laboratory in the baggage car where he continues his chemical experiments. You wince as one day in 1862, a phosphorus experiment catches fire, and an angry conductor evicts him and his makeshift laboratory from the train. At just 15, he's already learning that innovation carries risks, a lesson that will repeat throughout his life on much larger scales. What's particularly striking about this formative period is how Edison begins to synthesize different skills. He doesn't just sell newspapers, he recognizes an opportunity during the Civil War to bring news to travelers faster. When telegraph operators send battle news ahead to station stops, Edison prints quick bulletins about the battles to sell to passengers, creating perhaps the first breaking news service on the railways. As the sun sets on Edison's childhood, you can already see the hallmarks of the man he'll become: resourceful, opportunistic, undeterred by setbacks, and possessed of a relentless drive to improve and innovate. But you also glimpse something else, a certain willingness to bend rules and cut corners when it serves his purposes, a trait that will later emerge in his business dealings and bitter rivalries. The stage is set. The partially deaf, largely self-educated teenager is about to step into the rapidly evolving world of telegraphy, a technology that will give him his first real entry into the field of electrical science and set him on the path toward becoming the wizard of Menlo Park, and eventually Tesla's greatest adversary. You're now following a teenage Edison as he stumbles upon a life-changing moment at Mount Clemens Station in 1862. The station master's young son, Jimmy Mackenzie, has wandered onto the tracks as a freight train barrels forward. Without hesitation, Edison lunges forward and pulls the boy to safety. It's one of those split-second decisions that alters the course of history because the grateful father, J.U. Mackenzie offers to teach Edison the skill of telegraphy as thanks, a gesture that would unlock the young man's future. For the next 5 years, you watch as Edison wanders between telegraph offices throughout the Midwest as an itinerant operator, moving from city to city, picking up new skills and developing his technical understanding with each stop. In Cincinnati, Louisville, Indianapolis, Memphis, Boston, Edison's nimble fingers tap out messages, while his mind begins to envision improvements to the crude equipment he works with daily. What's particularly interesting is that his partial deafness, which might have been a career-ending disability for most telegraph operators who needed to hear the incoming signals, becomes an advantage. Edison develops the habit of feeling the vibrations of the telegraph sounder, allowing him to hear through touch what others perceive through sound. The telegraph offices of America in the 1860s are the tech startups of their era, buzzing with young men, and they are almost exclusively men, working with cutting-edge communication technology. The atmosphere is competitive, fast-paced, and often playful. Operators develop their own slang, pull pranks on each other over the wires, and compete to see who can transmit messages fastest. Edison, despite, or perhaps because of, his hearing impairment, develops a reputation as one of the quickest operators on the circuit. But Edison isn't content just being an operator. While other telegraphers clock out and head to saloons after their shifts, you observe him hunched over makeshift workbenches in boarding house rooms, tinkering with the mechanics of telegraph systems. His first significant invention emerges from this period, an automatic repeater that transfers telegraph signals between wires without requiring a human operator, allowing messages to travel farther distances. What's not widely taught in school is that Edison's early years as an inventor were marked by numerous failures and a certain flexible relationship with workplace rules. In Boston, while working the night shift at Western Union in 1868, he spends more time conducting private experiments than monitoring incoming messages. After accidentally spilling sulfuric acid on the floor, which leaks through to the manager's desk below, he's promptly fired. Edison later joked about these mishaps, but they reveal something crucial about his character, an almost obsessive focus on invention that often came at the expense of his regular duties. The year 1868 marks a pivotal transition as Edison decides to abandon his telegraph operator career and devote himself entirely to invention. It's a massive risk. He has no formal engineering education, limited savings, and is essentially betting everything on his ability to create marketable innovations. You watch as he arrives in New York City with reportedly just $1 in his pocket after spending his last resources on books and materials. In a stroke of legendary good fortune, and historians still debate how much of this you're there as he walks into the office of the Law's Gold Indicator Company as their stock ticker breaks down, creating complete chaos as financial information stops flowing. When none of the regular technicians can fix the machine, Edison steps forward, quickly identifies the problem, and repairs it on the spot. Dr. Samuel Laws, the impressed company president, hires him on the spot at the then substantial salary of $300 per month, equivalent to about $5,700 today. What makes this period so fascinating is how quickly Edison transforms from employee to entrepreneur. Within months of this fortuitous repair job, he partners with Franklin Pope to form Pope, Edison and Company. His first business venture focused on electrical engineering and invention. By 1869, he receives his very first patent for an electronic vote recorder designed for legislative bodies to tabulate votes quickly. The device works perfectly, but when Edison attempts to sell it to Congress, he receives a harsh lesson in market realities. The slow pace of voting gives legislators time to lobby colleagues and to switch positions, making a rapid vote counter politically undesirable. The chairman of the committee tells him bluntly, "Young man, that is just what we do not want." This rejection proves instrumental in forming Edison's future approach to invention. Then and there, Edison later claimed, "I made up my mind that I would never invent anything which was not wanted." This marks a crucial shift in his thinking. While many inventors create what they find interesting or technically impressive, Edison begins focusing exclusively on inventions with clear commercial potential. You notice something else during this time that rarely makes it into the simplified narratives. Edison is developing a knack for self-promotion and networking. He cultivates relationships with financial backers and business partners, recognizing that technical brilliance alone isn't enough to succeed. He begins spending time in the offices of the Scientific American magazine, making connections with editors, and learning about the latest technological developments across multiple fields. By the early 1870s, Edison is no longer just an inventor, but a businessman who understands the value of publicity. A quirky fact that rarely makes the textbooks. He starts carrying business cards that identify him as a consulting electrician and electrical engineer long before such professions were formally recognized. It's a small detail, but it reveals his forward-thinking approach to positioning himself in an emerging industry. As the first half of the 1870s unfolds, you watch Edison's reputation and financial situation steadily improve. He creates several improved versions of the stock ticker, develops a system for quadruplex telegraphy, allowing 4 messages to be transmitted simultaneously on a single wire, and patents several printing telegraphs. What's particularly remarkable is how he leverages each success to fund more ambitious projects, gradually building the capital and credibility that will eventually allow him to establish his revolutionary laboratory at Menlo Park. By 1875, as Edison approaches his 30th birthday, he's accumulated enough success and capital to begin dreaming bigger. The telegraph operator who once lived paycheck to paycheck now employs dozens of workers and is eyeing a new challenge, creating the world's first industrial research laboratory where invention itself could be industrialized. The stage is set for the next chapter of his story, where his most famous innovations and most controversial business tactics will emerge. You're now stepping into the mid-1870s, a period when Edison begins to transform from a clever telegraph operator into a professional inventor with growing influence. Having established his electrical engineering business, Edison focuses increasingly on telegraph, the technological frontier of that era. In April 1874, you watch as he perfects his quadruplex telegraph system, a breakthrough that allows two messages to be sent simultaneously in each direction on a single wire, effectively quadrupling the capacity of existing telegraph lines without requiring new infrastructure. This innovation attracts the attention of Western Union, the telecommunications giant of the era. When Edison sells the rights to his quadruplex system to them for the princely sum of $10,000, roughly $240,000 in today's money, it marks his first major financial windfall. What's less commonly known is that Edison had actually already sold the same rights to the rival Atlantic and Pacific Telegraph Company, creating one of his first major legal controversies. This double dealing results in a lawsuit that drags on for years, a pattern of intellectual property disputes that will follow him throughout his career. With his newfound capital, Edison establishes a proper workshop in Newark, New Jersey where he employs about 50 men. The shop bustles with activity as Edison and his team work on multiple projects simultaneously, an early version of what will become his famous innovation. You notice something distinctive about how Edison operates during this period. Unlike many inventors who jealously guard their creative process, he builds a collaborative environment where ideas flow freely. However, there's a catch. Edison ensures that all patents emerging from this collaboration bear his name alone, regardless of who might have contributed the key insights. One of Edison's telegraphic inventions from this period demonstrates his practical approach to problem solving. The embosser, a device that permanently records telegraph messages by punching indentations into paper tape, addresses a common legal issue of the time: disputes over what messages were actually sent. Before this invention, there was no permanent record once a message was delivered. Edison's device eliminates this problem, making telegraphic communication more reliable for business purposes. 1876 brings a technological development that will eventually rival even Edison's own innovations in importance. Alexander Graham Bell patents the telephone. You watch as Edison, never one to miss an opportunity, immediately recognizes the telephone's potential and sets to work improving it. Within months, he develops a superior transmitter using carbon instead of Bell's liquid transmitter, dramatically improving sound quality and range. This carbon transmitter remains the standard in telephones for nearly a century, a fact that often gets overshadowed by Edison's more famous invention. What many modern audiences don't realize is that Edison's work wasn't limited to electrical devices. During this fertile period, he also develops a pneumatic stencil pen that will later evolve into the mimeograph machine, the office copier of its day. This technology revolutionizes office work by allowing for the easy duplication of documents, becoming a standard piece of equipment in businesses and schools, until photocopiers emerge in the mid-20th century. As Edison's reputation grows, so does his ambition. The workshop in Newark becomes too limiting for his expanding vision. In 1876, a personal tragedy coincides with a professional transition. His first wife, Mary Stilwell, gives birth to their third child, and Edison, seeking a healthier environment for his family away from industrial Newark, purchases a property in rural Menlo Park, New Jersey. This seemingly simple relocation will become a pivotal moment in the history of innovation. Historians still argue about Edison's motivations for establishing Menlo Park. Was it purely a business decision to create more space for his growing operation? Or did he have a grander vision of establishing the world's first industrial research laboratory? What's clear is that by early 1876, construction begins on a two-story laboratory building and several smaller structures on the property. When completed, The main building features a machine shop on the first floor and chemical research facilities on the second, an integrated approach to invention that was revolutionary for its time. The Menlo Park Laboratory opens in March 1876, and you observe as Edison assembles a team of skilled machinists, chemists, mathematicians, and craftsmen. This collaborative approach to invention, bringing together diverse skills under one roof, represents a fundamental shift in how technological innovation happens. Before Edison, invention was largely the work of individual tinkerers or small partnerships. At Menlo Park, Edison industrializes the very process of invention itself. A quirky detail that rarely makes it into the standard narratives, Edison designs the laboratory with unusually tall windows to maximize natural light and includes a pipe organ in the main room. Music was one of the few pleasures his partial deafness didn't completely deny him, particularly when played at volumes that allowed him to feel the vibrations. The organ serves both as entertainment during long work sessions and occasionally as a test instrument for acoustic experiments. Edison's approach to staffing his laboratory reveals much about his character. He doesn't seek out prestigious university credentials, but instead develops unorthodox interview techniques to find practical problem solvers. One famous test involves giving potential employees a light bulb and asking them to calculate its volume. Those who simply fill it with water and then measure the water impress Edison more than those who attempt complex mathematical calculations. This preference for practical solutions over theoretical elegance becomes a defining characteristic of the Menlo Park operation. By late 1877, Menlo Park is hitting its stride. You watch as Edison and his team work punishing hours, often 16-hour days, sometimes working through the night when a project nears complete. Edison maintains a cot in the laboratory for catnaps during these marathon sessions. His extreme work ethic sets the tone for the entire operation, with one assistant later recalling, "We had no hours, but we did have good times. There was a great deal of fooling, wrestling, and storytelling when we were not at work." The first major breakthrough from the Menlo Park Laboratory comes in July 1877 when Edison develops an improved telephone transmitter that Western Union promptly purchases. But an even more significant innovation follows in November of that year, the phonograph, or as it was first called, the speaking machine. This invention, which records sound on tinfoil-wrapped cylinders, catapults Edison to international fame. What's particularly noteworthy is that unlike many of his other inventions that improved upon existing ideas, the phonograph was genuinely novel, the first device capable of both recording and reproducing sound. The public reaction to the phonograph is nothing short of astonishing. When Edison demonstrates it by recording and playing back "Mary Had a Little Lamb," audiences are stunned. Newspapers dub him the Wizard of Menlo Park, and his fame spreads worldwide. President Rutherford B. Hayes even invites him to the White House to demonstrate the device in April 1878. Yet amid this celebration, Edison is already looking ahead to his next, one that will define his legacy and eventually bring him into conflict with a brilliant young immigrant named Nikola Tesla. Practical electric light. You're now walking through the doors of what will become perhaps the most legendary innovation space in American history. Menlo Park stands as Edison's crowning achievement in 1876, not just as a physical laboratory, but as a revolutionary concept. This is the world's first industrial research facility, a place where invention itself becomes a methodical, organized process rather than the work of solitary geniuses tinkering in attics. The two-story wooden building doesn't look particularly impressive from the outside. It resembles an oversized country schoolhouse more than a temple of innovation. But step inside and you're greeted by a scene of organized chaos that would become the template for research facilities from Bell Labs to Silicon Valley. The first floor houses heavy machinery, lathes, drills, forges, and specialized tools capable of fabricating virtually any mechanical component. Upstairs, you find chemical laboratories, a photography darkroom, a small library, and Edison's private office. The smell is a peculiar mix of machine oil, chemicals, and the occasional whiff of tobacco from Edison's cigars. What makes Menlo Park truly revolutionary isn't just its equipment, but its staffing model. Edison assembles what he calls his muckers, a diverse team of skilled craftsmen, engineers, and scientists. There's machinist John Crucy, whose Swiss precision brings Edison's rough sketches to life. Charles Batchelor, Edison's trusted right-hand man who manages the laboratory. Mathematician Francis Upton, who provides theoretical foundations for Edison's practical experiments, and numerous others with specialized skills in glassblowing, chemistry, and mechanical engineering. A fascinating detail that rarely makes the history books. Edison intentionally recruits immigrants for many positions, valuing their specialized European training in scientific fields that were still developing in America. His workforce includes Germans, Swiss, Brits, and others who bring unique perspectives and skills. This international flavor contributes to the creative environment, though Edison maintains strict control over the direction of projects and, crucially, ownership of patents. The workflow at Menlo Park establishes a pattern that modern innovation labs still follow. Edison identifies promising areas for development, often based on commercial potential rather than scientific curiosity, then sets multiple teams working on different aspects of the problem simultaneously. When facing a particularly challenging technical obstacle, he sometimes announces competitions among his staff, offering cash bonuses for successful solutions. As you observe this process, you notice that while Edison is unquestionably the driving force and idea generator, many breakthrough innovations emerge from the collective brainpower of his team. Edison famously describes the Menlo Park methodology as 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, a philosophy that emphasizes systematic trial and error over theoretical brilliance. In practice, this often means testing thousands of variations until finding one that works. Modern critics might call this approach inefficient, but at a time when scientific understanding of electricity was still primitive, Edison's empirical methods produce results where theory alone might fail. The daily routine at Menlo Park would horrify modern workplace regulators. Work typically begins at 8 a.m. and continues until after midnight, with Edison often working even longer hours. He expects similar dedication from his staff, though he pays above-average wages for the era. During intense project phases, employees sometimes work for 24 hours straight, catching naps on cots distributed throughout the facility. Edison himself is notorious for his ability to function on minimal sleep, often working for days with only short. Legend has it that he sleeps at his desk, wake up, and continue working as if there had been no interruption. A quirky aspect of life at Menlo Park is Edison's approach to meat. Rather than regular lunch and dinner breaks, food is brought in and eaten whenever convenient, often while work continues. Edison is particularly fond of pie, and employees learn to keep apple pies on hand for the boss. One employee later recalled, Edison would eat pie right along while he worked. He'd take a whole pie and begin at one end and eat until it was all gone. This casual approach to meals reflects Edison's complete absorption in his work. Bodily needs like food and sleep are mere distractions from the pursuit of innovation. The first major triumph to emerge from Menlo Park is the phonograph in 1877, a truly original invention that captures the public's imagination. Unlike many of Edison's other inventions that improved existing technologies, the phonograph has no real predecessor. The ability to record and play back sound seems almost magical to the Victorian public, and Edison becomes an international celebrity almost overnight. Newspapers dub him the Wizard of Menlo Park, and visitors flock to the laboratory hoping to glimpse the famous inventor and his miraculous talking machine. What's not widely appreciated is how the phonograph's success transforms Edison's financial situation and business model. Before this breakthrough, he primarily sells his patents directly to companies like Western Union. After becoming famous, he begins forming his own companies to commercialize his inventions, retaining greater control and potentially much higher profits. The Edison Speaking Phonograph Company, established in early 1878, represents this new approach, though ironically, Edison soon abandons further phonograph development for several years, distracted by what he sees as an even greater opportunity: electric light. The laboratory's focus shifts dramatically in 1878 when Edison announces his intention to develop a practical incandescent light bulb and complete electrical distribution system. This bold declaration raises eyebrows among scientific experts, many of whom believe the challenge insurmountable, after decades of failed attempts by others. Edison's confidence borders on arrogance. He tells reporters he'll solve the lighting problem in 6 weeks. In reality, it will take his team more than a year of intensive effort. The electric lighting project transforms Menlo Park into an even more intense environment. New staff are hired, including Ludwig Böhm, a skilled German glassblower whose expertise proves crucial in manufacturing experimental bulbs. The laboratory expands physically, with additional buildings constructed to house specialized equipment. A power plant is built to generate electricity for experiments, and the laboratory grounds are strung with wires as Edison tests not just light bulbs, but the entire system of generators, distribution networks, and fixtures needed for practical lighting. What makes the Menlo Park approach so revolutionary during this period is its integration of scientific research with practical engineering and commercial awareness. Edison doesn't just want to create a laboratory curiosity, he aims to develop a complete system that can be manufactured, installed, and operated profitably. This holistic approach to innovation, considering everything from basic science to business models, distinguishes Edison from many contemporary inventors focused solely on technical problems. Historians still debate whether Edison consciously set out to create a new model for industrial research, or if Menlo Park evolved organically from his practical needs. What's clear is that by 1879, as the electric lighting project nears completion, Edison has established a template that will be widely copied. General Electric, Westinghouse, and later Bell Telephone all establish research laboratories modeled on Menlo Park, recognizing the power of organized, collaborative innovation. The success of Menlo Park establishes Edison's reputation not just as an inventor, but as a visionary who understands how to harness collective intelligence. Yet even as his laboratory model transforms American innovation, the seeds of future controversies are being sown. Edison's insistence on claiming patents solely in his name, despite the collaborative nature of the work, will eventually lead to resentment among some employees. And his fierce defense of his own technological approaches, particularly in electric power distribution, will set the stage for the bitter war of currents with former employee Nikola Tesla and business rival George Westinghouse. As 1879 approaches its end, Edison and his team are on the verge of their greatest triumph, a practical incandescent light bulb that will change the world. But this breakthrough will also mark the beginning of Edison's most controversial chapter, as commercial success breeds both wealth and ethical compromises that complicate his legacy. You've probably seen the iconic image: Thomas Edison gazing at a glowing light bulb, the very symbol of the Eureka moment. It's clean, it's simple, and like most simplifications of history, it's woefully incomplete. As you step into the frantic atmosphere of Menlo Park in 1879, you discover that the reality of the light bulb's development was far messier and more morally ambiguous than the storybook version suggests. By the late 1870s, the race to develop practical electric lighting is already well underway, with numerous inventors and companies competing to replace gas lighting in homes and businesses. What's rarely mentioned in elementary school textbooks is that Edison was relatively late to this particular game. Earlier researchers like Joseph Swan in England, Alexander Luttegen in Russia, and Henry Woodward and Matthew Evans in Canada had already developed various forms of incandescent lighting, with Swan demonstrating a working carbon filament bulb in early 1879. So if Edison wasn't first, why does he get all the credit? The answer reveals Edison's true genius, not as the originator of the light bulb concept, but as the creator of the first commercially viable lighting system. Previous bulbs burned out too quickly, required too much power, or were too expensive to manufacture. Edison's breakthrough was developing a high-resistance carbon filament that could operate at practical voltage for hundreds of hours, along with designing the entire infrastructure needed to bring electricity into homes and businesses. The work at Menlo Park during 1879 is nothing short of obsessive. You watch as Edison drives his team to test literally thousands of materials as potential filaments: carbonized cotton thread, cardboard, fishing line, coconut fiber, and even hairs from employees' beards. In one famous anecdote, Edison dispatches men to collect plant fibers from across the globe, testing bamboo varieties from Japan, grasses from the Amazon, and palm fronds from Cuba. This methodical, exhaustive approach, rather than a single flash of inspiration, is what eventually yields results. On October 21, 1879, Edison's team achieves their breakthrough, creating a bulb with a carbonized cotton thread filament that burns for about 13.5 hours. Improvements follow rapidly, and by November, they develop a bulb lasting over 40 hours, the famous long-lasting bulb with carbonized bamboo filament that burns for over 500 hours comes later in 1880. Edison files his patent application on November 4, 1879, receiving U.S. Patent 223-98 for an electric lamp using a carbon filament or strip coiled and connected to platina contact wires. Here's where the story gets ethically murky, and historians still vigorously debate Edison's actions. Joseph Swan had demonstrated his carbon filament bulb in England months before Edison's breakthrough and had filed for a British patent in 1878. When Edison attempted to patent his light bulb in Britain, Swan sued for infringement. The eventual resolution reveals Edison's pragmatic business sense. Rather than fight a potentially losing legal battle, Edison offers Swan a partnership. They form the Edison and Swan United Electric Light Company, later known as Ediswan, in Britain, effectively neutralizing his competitor by making him an ally. What's particularly interesting about this period is how Edison navigates the complex interplay between scientific achievement, legal protection, and public perception. While working on the light bulb, he makes a strategic decision that would become a hallmark of his business approach, filing for patents on multiple aspects of the technology, creating a thicket of legal protection. By the time his lighting system is commercially ready, Edison holds patents not just on the bulb itself, but on sockets, switches, distribution methods, and power generation, essentially controlling every aspect of the system. Less flattering to Edison's legacy is his treatment of competitors' prior work. Throughout his career, he downplays or outright dismisses the contributions of earlier inventors. When questioned about Swan's earlier bulb, Edison reportedly responded, "Swan? Who is Swan?" despite clearly being aware of his work. This pattern of minimizing others' contributions while maximizing his own would later feature prominently in his conflicts with Tesla. The commercialization of Edison's lighting system moves at breathtaking speed. On December 31, 1879, he stages a public demonstration at Menlo Park, illuminating the laboratory and surrounding grounds with about 40 light bulbs. Special trains bring visitors from New York to witness this spectacle, including prominent financiers and journalists. The public relations savvy on display is remarkable. Edison understands that creating excitement and attracting investment is as important as the technology itself. In 1880, Edison establishes the Edison Electric Illuminating Company of New York, later part of what becomes General Electric, to commercialize his lighting system. On September 4, 1882, he opens the Pearl Street Station in Lower Manhattan, America's first central power plant, initially serving 59 customers with 400 light bulbs. The significance of this achievement goes far beyond the light bulb itself. Edison has created an entire electrical infrastructure, from generation to distribution to end-use devices. A fascinating detail often overlooked is that Edison's early power stations operated on direct current, DC, which would soon become a critical point of contention. DC power has significant limitations. Most notably, it cannot travel long distances without substantial power loss, requiring generating stations every mile or so. Edison was well aware of these limitations but committed to DC for both technical and financial reasons. His patents and equipment were designed for direct current, and switching to alternatives would mean abandoning substantial investments. This commitment to DC power would soon bring Edison into direct conflict with alternating current AC technology, championed by George Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla, setting the stage for the infamous War of Currents. Edison's defense of his chosen technology would lead him down a disturbing path, using increasingly questionable tactics to protect his business interests. As the 1880s dawn, Edison stands at the peak of his fame and influence. The Wizard of Menlo Park has transformed from a bootstrapping inventor to a wealthy industrialist and international celebrity. His Menlo Park laboratory has produced the phonograph, practical electric lighting, improved telephones, and numerous other innovations, a track record of success unmatched by any other innovation facility of the era. Yet the very success of his electric lighting business creates new pressures, and Edison's decision to focus on direct current electrical systems is partly based on legitimate safety concerns. Early AC systems indeed had fewer safeguards, but it's also driven by commercial self-interest. By 1882, Edison has invested heavily in DC infrastructure and holds numerous patents specific to DC technology. The emergence of alternating current as a viable alternative represents not just a technical challenge, but a profound threat to his business empire. What many people don't realize is that Edison's famous quote, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration," referred specifically to the light bulb development process. The thousands of experiments, the global search for the perfect filament material, the integration of the entire electrical system, all represented that 99% of hard work that turned a concept into a commercial reality. As Edison's electric lighting business grows, he gradually shifts his role from hands-on inventor to business strategist and public figure. Day-to-day research at his facilities increasingly falls to his team of engineers and scientists, while Edison focuses on commercialization, financing, and defending his market. This transition from inventor to industrialist marks a significant shift in his career and sets the stage for the bitter conflicts that would define the next phase of his life, as a brilliant young engineer named Nikola Tesla enters the picture with ideas that threaten to upend Edison's electrical empire. You're now stepping into the most contentious chapter of Edison's story, the so-called War of Currents that began in the mid-1880s. This technological battle would define electrical infrastructure for generations to come and reveal some of Edison's most disturbing tactics. To understand this conflict, you need to appreciate the fundamental difference between the two competing electrical systems. Edison's direct current, DC system, which powered his early lighting networks, delivered electricity at a constant voltage in a single direction. Like water flowing steadily through a pipe, DC was relatively simple to produce, and at low voltages, relatively safe. But it had a critical flaw. DC power couldn't travel far without significant losses, requiring power stations every mile or so, a prohibitively expensive infrastructure model for reaching beyond dense urban areas. Alternating current, AC, meanwhile rapidly switches direction dozens of times per second. This might seem like a strange approach, but it offered a game-changing advantage. Transformers could easily step AC voltage up for efficient long-distance transmission, then step it down again for safe household. This meant power plants could be built far from population centers, with electricity economically transmitted over many miles. By 1885, Edison's investment in DC infrastructure is massive. He has built power stations in New York, London, Paris, and other major cities. His patents, equipment manufacturing, and business model all center on DC technology. Then comes the threat. George Westinghouse, a successful inventor and industrialist in his own right, recognizes the superior efficiency of AC systems and begins building competing power infrastructure. What makes this period so fascinating is watching Edison, typically portrayed as a hero of American transform into something closer to a corporate villain, willing to employ increasingly unethical tactics to protect his business interests. The Thomas Edison you're observing now is far from the plucky, determined young telegrapher of earlier years. He's now a wealthy industrialist with a vast commercial empire to defend, and his actions reflect this transformation. Edison's initial response to the AC challenge is to launch a publicity campaign emphasizing the dangers of high-voltage alternating current. This isn't entirely disingenuous. Early AC systems indeed lacked many modern safety features, and fatal accidents did occur. But Edison takes this legitimate concern and weaponizes it through increasingly sensational demonstrations and publicity stunts. A particularly disturbing and lesser-known episode begins in 1888, when Edison secretly finances experiments by Harold Brown, an electrical engineer who publicly presents himself as an independent safety expert. Brown stages a series of public demonstrations showing the lethal effects of AC electricity on stray dogs and cats purchased from neighborhood boys for 25 cents each. These animals are killed on stage before audiences of journalists and officials, electrocuted, to prove Brown's supposed point about AC's dangers. What the audiences don't know is that Brown is receiving both financial support and technical guidance from Edison's company. Edison's personal involvement in these demonstrations remains one of the most ethically troubling aspects of his career. In private laboratory notes, Edison writes, "Just as certain as death, Westinghouse will kill a customer within 6 months after he puts in a system of any size." The battle escalates when Edison's publicity campaign coins a new term designed to associate AC power with death. Westinghouse, he suggests, should become a verb, meaning to be electrocuted. Though this linguistic sabotage ultimately fails to enter the lexicon, it demonstrates how far Edison is willing to go to undermine his competition. Historians still debate Edison's personal feelings during this period. Was he genuinely concerned about public safety or merely protecting his business interests? The truth likely contains elements of both. Edison did believe DC was safer at household voltages, but his methods of advocacy crossed ethical lines that can't be justified by safety concerns alone. Meanwhile, Westinghouse responds to these attacks with remarkable restraint. Rather than engaging in similar mudslinging, he focuses on demonstrating AC's technical and economic advantages. He hires talented engineers, improves safety features, and continues building AC infrastructure at a rapid pace. His company's slogan, "Westinghouse, you can be sure if it's Westinghouse," subtly counters Edison's safety allegations. The conflict intensifies in 1888 when a pivotal figure enters the story, Nikola Tesla, a brilliant engineer who had briefly worked for Edison before leaving after a payment dispute. Tesla holds several crucial patents for AC motors and power distribution. Westinghouse, recognizing their value, purchases Tesla's patents and hires him as a consultant. This gives Westinghouse a significant technical advantage, as Tesla's polyphase AC system is more efficient than earlier versions. Edison's response to this development is telling. Rather than adapting his own technology to compete, he doubles down on his anti-AC campaign. As one executive from Edison General Electric later admitted, "I remember that when I was making every effort to sell arc lighting apparatus, the representatives of the Westinghouse company would hand the prospective customer a newspaper clipping that told of someone having been killed by the Edison current." What's particularly ironic about this period is that while Edison publicly demonizes AC power as a deadly danger, his own employees, recognizing its technical superiority, are quietly working to develop AC equipment. By 1889, engineering reality is becoming increasingly difficult to deny, even for Edison. The turning point in the war of currents comes from an unexpected direction: the development of the electric chair as a method of capital punishment. In 1889, New York State is seeking a more humane alternative to hanging for execution. A commission established to investigate electrical execution approaches Edison for technical advice. Seeing another opportunity to associate AC with death, Edison recommends alternating machines manufactured principally in this country by G.O. Westinghouse. You're witnessing one of the darkest chapters in American innovation history as Edison actively lobbies for Westinghouse AC generators to be used in the world's first electric chair. His goal is nakedly strategic: to create a permanent association between Westinghouse's technology and state-sanctioned killing. Westinghouse, understanding this strategy, refuses to sell generators for this purpose, forcing the state to acquire used Westinghouse equipment through third parties. On August 6, 1890, convicted murderer William Kemmler becomes the first person executed by electric chair. The execution is horrifically botched, requiring multiple shocks and leaving witnesses traumatized by what one reporter called an awful spectacle, far worse than hanging. Edison hoped this gruesome scene would turn the public against AC power. Instead, it mainly generated debate about capital punishment itself. Despite Edison's aggressive campaigns, market realities gradually force a reckoning. By the early 1890s, the technical and economic advantages of AC for power distribution become impossible to ignore. In 1892, Edison General Electric merges with Thomson Houston Electric Company to form General Electric. In a supreme irony, Edison is essentially forced out of the company bearing his name during this transition, and the new leadership promptly begins shifting toward AC technology. The war of currents ultimately ends with AC's clear victory. By 1896, even General Electric is fully committed to AC power for transmission, though DC continues to have specialized applications. Edison, despite his enormous influence and resources, fails to stop the superior technology. The electrical infrastructure that powers your home today, transformers on poles, high-voltage transmission lines connecting to distant power plants, represents the legacy of Westinghouse and Tesla's victory. This chapter of Edison's career reveals how thoroughly commercial interests had come to drive his decisions. The young man who once pursued innovation for its own sake had transformed into a businessman willing to electrocute animals in public demonstrations to protect his market share. It's a transformation that complicates any simple narrative about Edison as an American hero and sets the stage for his most bitter personal rivalry with the brilliant and eccentric Nikola Tesla. You find yourself in the cramped workshop of a young Serbian immigrant in 1884, watching as he nervously prepares to meet the great Thomas Edison. Nikola Tesla has just arrived in America with little more than his technical education, a letter of recommendation from Edison's European representative Charles Batchelor, and a head full of revolutionary ideas about alternating current. The note from Batchelor reads simply, "I know two great men. One is you, and the other is this young man." Tesla's journey to this moment has been anything but straightforward. Born in 1856 in what is now Croatia, then part of the Austrian Empire, Tesla showed remarkable intellectual gifts from childhood. After studying engineering at the Austrian Polytechnic in Graz, he worked for the Continental Edison Company in Paris, where his brilliance caught bachelor's attention. Tesla had already begun developing his ideas about alternating current motors and generation systems, concepts that would eventually revolutionize electrical power. When Tesla finally meets Edison at his office on Fifth Avenue, the contrast between the two men couldn't be more striking. Edison, stocky, practical, partially deaf, and largely self-educated, embodies the American ideal of the self-made man. Tesla, tall, slender, formally educated, and speaking with a noticeable accent, represents a more European model of the trained engineer-scientist. Their temperaments differ just as dramatically. Edison is blunt, pragmatic, and focused on commercial applications, while Tesla is theoretical, idealistic, and often eccentric. What happens next becomes one of the most contested narratives in the history of innovation. According to Tesla's later accounts, Edison immediately hires him to improve the efficiency of Edison's DC generators. When Tesla explains that his AC motor designs could provide more efficient power distribution, Edison dismisses the idea, allegedly telling him, "Spare me that nonsense. It's dangerous. We're set up for direct current in America. People like it, and it's all I'll ever fool with." To point, you observe Tesla working feverishly for Edison over the next 6 months, often from 10:30 a.m. to 5 a.m. the next day. His primary assignment is redesigning Edison's DC generators to eliminate design flaws and improve efficiency. Tesla later claimed that Edison had promised him $50,000, equivalent to well over $1 million today, if he successfully completed these improvements. When Tesla proudly announces he has solved the problem, Edison allegedly laughs and says, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor," offering instead a modest weekly raise from $18 to. Historians still debate whether this account is entirely accurate. Edison's defenders suggest Tesla might have misunderstood a joke or exaggerated the promised amount. What's clear is that by spring 1885, Tesla has resigned from Edison's company, deeply disillusioned. For several months, he works as a manual laborer, digging ditches for the Edison Company, a separate entity from Edison's laboratory, to survive. A humiliating position for a trained engineer with revolutionary ideas. This brief and contentious association between Tesla and Edison establishes the foundation for what will become one of the most famous rivalries in scientific history. Their conflict is more than just a personal dispute. It represents fundamentally different visions of electrical technology and innovation itself. Edison's empirical, commercially driven approach contrasts sharply with Tesla's theoretical, sometimes visionary perspective. Tesla's fortunes begin to change in 1887 when he attracts investors to fund the Tesla Electric Company. He quickly files patents for a comprehensive AC power, including generators, transformers, transmission systems, motors, and lights. These patents describe a polyphase system that efficiently delivers power over long distances, precisely the solution needed to overcome the limitations of Edison's DC system. The significance of Tesla's AC motor cannot be overstated. Previous AC systems could transmit power efficiently, but lacked an effective motor, a critical limitation since motors drove industrial machinery. Tesla's elegant solution, using a rotating magnetic field to create an induction motor, removes this final obstacle to AC adoption. George Westinghouse, recognizing the revolutionary potential of these patents, purchases them for $60,000 in cash and stock, plus royalties of $2.50 per horsepower of motors sold. This transaction transforms the war of currents. Westinghouse now has both the capital and the technical solutions to build a complete AC system superior to Edison's DC network. Edison, recognizing the existential threat to his electrical empire, escalates his anti-AC propaganda campaign to new, disturbing levels. What's particularly fascinating about Tesla during this period is how differently he approaches the conflict compared to Edison. While Edison embraces bare-knuckle business tactics and public relations warfare, Tesla focuses almost exclusively on technical innovation. He continues refining his AC systems while working as a consultant for Westinghouse, seemingly uninterested in the business battles or personal attacks. A telling demonstration of this difference comes in 1891. While Edison is staging public electrocutions of animals to demonstrate AC's dangers, Tesla is dazzling audiences with dramatic but harmless demonstrations showing how AC current can pass through his body to illuminate wireless light bulbs. In these presentations, Tesla stands on an insulated platform connected to high-frequency AC current, his body seemingly engulfed in electrical fire without harm. These theatrical demonstrations effectively counter Edison's safety allegations while establishing Tesla's public image as an almost magical figure, the real wizard of electricity. The rivalry between these two brilliant but incompatible men extends beyond their competing electrical systems. Their working methods couldn't be more different. Edison's famous trial-and-error approach tests thousands of materials to find solutions, while Tesla often works out complete designs in his mind before building a single prototype. Edison builds large teams and claims sole credit for their collective work. Tesla works with minimal assistance and freely acknowledges his influences. Edison focuses relentlessly on practical, marketable inventions. Tesla increasingly pursues more speculative and visionary concepts. Their personal lives reflect these differences as well. Edison marries twice and fathers 6 children, living as a conventional, if exceptionally busy, family man. Tesla remains single throughout his life, forms few close friendships, and develops increasingly peculiar personal habits, including a pathological fear of germs, an obsession with the number 3, and rituals involving pigeons in his later years. By 1893, the technical superiority of Tesla's AC system becomes undeniable when Westinghouse wins the contract to electrify the Chicago World's Fair. The White City dazzles millions of visitors with the magic of AC-powered electric light, dealing a significant public relations blow to Edison's DC advocacy. The following year, Westinghouse wins the contract to build AC generators at Niagara Falls, the definitive victory in the War of Currents. An often overlooked detail from this period reveals much about both men's characters. As Westinghouse struggles financially during the economic panic of 1893, he asks Tesla to renegotiate their royalty agreement, which is draining the company's cash flow. Tesla, recognizing that Westinghouse had believed in him when others wouldn't, reportedly tears up the contract that would have made him immensely wealthy, saying, "Mr. Westinghouse, you have been my friend. You believed in me when others had no faith. You were brave enough to go ahead. When others lacked courage, you supported me when even your own engineers lacked vision. Here is your contract, and here is my... I will tear both of them up. You will save your company so that you can develop my invention." This gesture, whether motivated by friendship, pragmatism, or Tesla's notorious disinterest in financial matters, stands in stark contrast to Edison's relentless defense of his business interests during the same period. Tesla sacrifices potential wealth to advance his technology. Edison electrocutes animals to protect his market share. As the century draws to a close, Tesla emerges as the clear technical victor in the AC-DC battle, but Edison's business acumen and publicity skills have built him the more secure legacy. The company bearing Edison's name, General Electric, becomes one of America's industrial giants, while Tesla's relationship with Westinghouse gradually diminishes. The stage is set for the next phase of their rivalry, as both men seek to extend their influence into the 20th century through new inventions, new businesses, and competing visions of America's technological future. You're now observing Edison at the peak of his fame, not just as an inventor, but as one of America's first celebrity businessmen. By the 1890s, Edison has mastered the art of self-promotion in ways that would make modern influencers nod in appreciation. His face is recognized across America and Europe. His pronouncements on technology make front-page news, and his name itself has become a synonym for genius and innovation. What's particularly fascinating about this period is how deliberately Edison crafts this public image, and how dramatically it sometimes diverges from reality. The myth-making begins with Edison's own storytelling. Throughout his career, Edison proves remarkably adept at shaping narratives about his inventions and working method. He regularly invites journalists to Menlo Park and later to his West Orange laboratory, giving carefully orchestrated tours that showcase his inventive genius while concealing the collaborative nature of his operation. These press visits typically feature Edison making apparently spontaneous adjustments to devices or having sudden insights while reporters watch in admiration. Moments that are, in reality, often rehearsed for maximum dramatic effect. Edison cultivates personal relationships with prominent newspaper publishers and editors, ensuring favorable coverage of his work. He becomes particularly close with Edward Marshall of the New York Times, who publishes numerous flattering profiles that shape public perception of the inventor. This symbiotic relationship benefits both parties. Edison receives positive publicity, while journalists get access to one of the era's most famous figures and exciting stories about cutting-edge technology. What's especially clever about Edison's public relations strategy is how he positions himself as the embodiment of American values: hard work, practical thinking, commercial success, and individual achievement. He frequently emphasizes his limited formal education and portrays his innovations as the result of determination rather than theoretical knowledge. "I never did anything worth doing by accident," he tells reporters. "Nor did any of my inventions come by accident. They came by work." This narrative of the self-made inventor resonates powerfully in Gilded Age America, where rags-to-riches stories captivate the public imagination. Edison becomes more than just a successful businessman. He represents the promise of American meritocracy itself, the idea that anyone with enough grit and intelligence can achieve greatness regardless of background. This carefully constructed image helps insulate Edison from criticism when his business tactics turn questionable, as they often do during the War of Currents. A particularly effective aspect of Edison's marketing genius is his talent for creating memorable demonstrations and quotable statements. When introducing the phonograph, he records himself reciting, "Mary had a little lamb," a deliberately childlike choice that makes the technology seem friendly rather than intimidating. When demonstrating electric light, he creates elaborate displays of thousands of bulbs, transforming technical achievement into a visual spectacle. These demonstrations generate newspaper coverage, popular excitement, and, crucially, investor interest. Edison also understands the power of bold predictions in capturing public imagination. He regularly makes sweeping pronouncements about future technologies, positioning himself as a visionary who can see beyond the horizon. Many of these predictions are remarkably prescient. He foresees electric vehicles, wireless communication, and solar energy. Others, like his claim that he would soon communicate with the dead through scientific means, are bizarre failures, but even the failed predictions serve their purpose, keeping Edison's name in headlines and reinforcing his image as an innovative thinker. What's less frequently discussed is how Edison uses his celebrity status to overshadow competitors and diminish the contributions of collaborators. Throughout his career, he demonstrates a pattern of minimizing others' work while maximizing credit for himself. The most obvious example is his treatment of Tesla, whose alternating current system ultimately proves superior to Edison's direct current approach. Rather than acknowledging Tesla's achievement, Edison launches his infamous smear campaign against AC power. But this pattern extends to his own employees as well. While Edison relies heavily on talented engineers and scientists like Francis Upton, Charles Batchelor, and William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, he insists that patents list him as the sole or primary inventor. His notebooks and correspondence reveal that many Edison inventions originate with suggestions or technical solutions from his staff, which Edison then develops and claims. The motion picture camera, for instance, is largely the work of Dixon, though Edison receives primary credit in popular accounts. This appropriation of credit becomes increasingly problematic as Edison's operations grow. By the 1890s, his West Orange laboratory employs over 200 researchers, engineers, and craftsmen working on dozens of projects simultaneously. Edison simply cannot be personally involved in all these endeavors, yet the public image maintains the fiction of the lone genius inventor tirelessly working on each innovation. A particularly revealing example of Edison's media manipulation occurs in 1903, during the filming of Electrocuting an Elephant. In this disturbing incident, a circus elephant named Topsy, who had killed several handlers, is publicly electrocuted at Coney Island using alternating current. Edison's film company documents the execution, and Edison ensures the footage circulates widely as a demonstration of AC's dangers, despite the fact that by this time, even Edison's own companies have largely switched to AC systems due to their technical superiority. The cynicism of using an animal's death as a publicity stunt years after losing the war of currents reveals the lengths to which Edison would go to manipulate public perception. Edison's relationship with the press occasionally becomes strained when journalists challenge his narratives. When newspapers report on legal battles over patent ownership or highlight the contributions of his competitors, Edison often responds with indignation. In several cases, he banishes specific reporters from his laboratories after receiving coverage he considers unfavorable. This thin-skinned response to criticism contrasts sharply with his cultivated public image as a practical, no-nonsense businessman. The gap between Edison's public persona and private business practices grows particularly evident in his patent litigation strategy. Publicly, Edison portrays himself as an inventor who simply wants fair compensation for his creative work. Behind the scenes, he builds one of the most aggressive patent enforcement operations of the era, filing hundreds of lawsuits against competitors, both large and small. His company employs teams of lawyers whose primary purpose is to use patent claims, sometimes quite tenuous ones, to block competition or force settlement. This aggressive approach reaches its peak in the early motion picture industry. Edison patents aspects of film technology and uses these patents to create the Motion Picture Patents Company, effectively a monopolistic trust that controls film production, distribution, and exhibition. Independent filmmakers who refuse to pay Edison's licensing fees face harassment, confiscation of equipment, and lawsuits. This heavy-handed enforcement eventually drives many filmmakers to relocate to a distant Los Angeles neighborhood called Hollywood, specifically to escape Edison's patent enforcement on the East Coast, inadvertently helping create the American film industry's permanent home. What makes Edison's media manipulation particularly effective is that it isn't entirely fraudulent. He genuinely is a brilliant inventor with numerous significant achievements. His workaholic tendencies and dedication to practical innovation are real, not fabricated. But his marketing genius lies in emphasizing these positive aspects while concealing less flattering truths. His business ruthlessness, his appropriation of others' ideas, and his willingness to use questionable tactics against competitors. By the early 20th century, Edison has constructed a public image so powerful that it persists largely unchanged to this day in elementary school textbooks and popular culture. The simplified narrative of the tireless, benevolent genius illuminating the world through sheer determination, overshadows the more complex reality of a brilliant but flawed man whose greatest invention may have been his own mythology. You're now witnessing one of the most disturbing chapters in Edison's career, a series of public spectacles so gruesome they seem almost unbelievable today. As the war of currents intensifies in the late 1880s, Edison abandons scientific debate in favor of a macabre publicity campaign designed to associate his rival's alternating current technology with death and danger. What unfolds is a calculated program of public animal electrocutions that reveals just how far Edison is willing to go to protect his business interests. The campaign begins innocuously enough. In 1886, Edison starts publishing pamphlets and giving newspaper interviews warning about the dangers of high-voltage alternating current. These early efforts stick relatively close to legitimate safety concerns. AC systems of the era indeed lacked many modern safeguards, and accidental electrocutions did occasionally occur. But as Westinghouse's AC systems gain market share, Edison's tactics take a much darker turn. In late 1887, Edison hires Harold Brown, a self-proclaimed electrical engineer with minimal credentials, as his proxy in the safety campaign. Brown's official role is as an independent electrical safety expert, though he is secretly on Edison's payroll, a connection deliberately hidden from the public. With Edison's financial backing and technical guidance, Brown begins staging public demonstrations designed to prove AC's lethal potential. The first major demonstration occurs on July 30, 1888, at the Columbia College School of Mines in New York. Before an audience of reporters and prominent electricians, Brown shows how alternating current at relatively low voltages can kill a dog, while direct current at the same voltage merely causes discomfort. What the audience doesn't know is that the demonstration is rigged. Brown uses different electrical configurations for the two tests to ensure the desired outcome. A particularly disturbing aspect of these demonstrations is their sourcing of test subjects. Our Brown's assistant collects stray dogs and cats from street children, paying them 25 cents per animal. These animals, often pets that have wandered from home, are brought to Edison's laboratory, where staff members, including Brown, experiment to determine precisely what voltage is required to kill different sizes and species of animals. The records of these experiments make for grim reading, with notes documenting the animals' reactions as voltage increases. Edison, who generally presents himself as an animal lover and keeps pets at his home, appears to have no qualms about these experiments. In a particularly revealing comment to reporters, he suggests that a Westinghouse AC generator would be the most efficient way to execute criminals, adding that it might be called the Westinghouse chair. This calculated attempt to associate his competitor's name with death shows how thoroughly commercial interests have come to drive Edison's actions. The demonstrations escalate throughout 1888, with Brown staging increasingly elaborate public electrocutions of dogs, calves, and horses. These events attract substantial press coverage, with newspapers running sensational headlines about the deadly current. Brown makes sure to emphasize that he's using Westinghouse generators purchased specifically for these demonstrations, creating the association Edison desires. A quirky and overlooked detail about this period reveals the lengths to which Edison would go to acquire Westinghouse equipment for these demonstrations. When Westinghouse refuses to sell generators for Brown's experiments, Edison arranges to purchase used Westinghouse equipment through third parties, sometimes paying substantially above market value to maintain the supply of AC generators for electrocution demonstrations. The campaign reaches a disturbing climax on December 5, 1888, when Brown stages the electrocution of Topsy, a full-grown circus elephant that had killed 3 handlers after years of abuse. This execution, conducted at Luna Park on Coney Island, uses 6,600 volts of alternating current supplied by Westinghouse generators. Edison's company films the event, producing electrocuting an elephant, which is then distributed to theaters across America, bringing the spectacle of AC-powered death to audiences nationwide. What's particularly cynical about these demonstrations is that Edison and his technical staff are well aware that both AC and DC can be lethal at sufficient voltages. The difference is not one of inherent safety, but of practical application. AC can be efficiently transmitted at high voltages over long distances, then transformed down to safer voltages for consumer use, while DC cannot. Edison's demonstrations deliberately obscure this distinction, focusing public attention on the high transmission voltages of AC while ignoring that household AC is stepped down to safer levels. The electrocution campaign represents a profound ethical compromise for a man who built his early reputation on improving human life through technology. Edison essentially weaponizes scientific demonstrations, abandoning objective presentation of facts in favor of manipulative propaganda. Some of his own employees expressed discomfort with these tactics. One laboratory assistant reportedly resigns rather than participate in the animal experiments. Westinghouse responds to these attacks with remarkable restraint. Rather than engaging in similar publicity stunts, he focuses on improving the safety features of his AC systems and demonstrating their economic advantages. When asked about Edison's campaign, Westinghouse coolly remarks, "I remember Tom Edison telling me he was going to kill a man with my current. He said, 'I'll fix that fellow Westinghouse.' That's all I know," what he told me himself. The animal electrocution campaign takes an even darker turn when Edison becomes involved in the development of the electric chair as a method of human execution. In 1888, New York State establishes a commission to find a more humane alternative to hanging for capital punishment. Edison, spotting another opportunity to associate AC with death, provides technical advice to the commission, specifically recommending Westinghouse's alternating current as the most effective means of execution. You're observing one of the most ethically problematic episodes in American innovation history as Edison actively lobbies for his competitors' technology to be used for capital punishment. He provides detailed technical specifications, recommends voltage levels, and even suggests electrode placement, all while publicly maintaining that his interest is purely humanitarian. In private correspondence, however, Edison's commercial motivations are clear. He writes to one colleague that the electric chair will help get rid of those infernal machines, meaning Westinghouse's AC generators. Westinghouse, recognizing Edison's strategy, refuses to sell generators to prisons for execution purposes and even funds legal appeals for the first prisoners sentenced to electrocution, arguing that the method constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. Despite these efforts, New York proceeds with its plans, using Westinghouse equipment purchased through third parties. On August 6, 1890, William Kemmler becomes the first person executed by electric chair at Auburn Prison in New York. The execution is horrifically botched. The initial shock fails to kill Kemmler, leaving him breathing and foaming at the mouth until a second, longer shock is administered. Witnesses are traumatized, with one reporter describing it as an awful spectacle, far worse than hanging. Rather than demonstrating the humanitarian benefits of the electrical execution, the event highlights its potential for torture. Edison hopes this gruesome scene will turn the public against AC power. Instead, it mainly generates debate about capital punishment itself. Nevertheless, for years afterward, newspapers describe electrocutions as being done with Westinghouse current, precisely the association Edison sought to create. The animal electrocution campaign ultimately fails to prevent AC's adoption as the dominant electrical standard. By the early 1890s, the technical and economic advantages of AC for power distribution become impossible to ignore. In a supreme irony, Edison General Electric, after merging with Thomson-Houston to form General Electric, eventually adopts AC technology itself, essentially abandoning Edison's position. This episode reveals a profound contradiction in Edison's career. The man who claimed his purpose was to develop technology that would bring out the best in humanity engages in a campaign that brings out some of the worst aspects of his own character: willingness to inflict suffering for commercial gain, manipulation of public opinion through deception, and prioritization of business interests over ethical considerations. Perhaps most revealing is how thoroughly Edison comes to believe his own propaganda. Even years after AC has become the established standard and its safety record in proper installations is well demonstrated, Edison continues to insist on the inherent dangers of alternating current. Like many who engage in prolonged campaigns of misinformation, he appears unable to distinguish between genuine concerns and manufactured ones. The line between tactical deception and personal conviction blurs until perhaps even Edison himself cannot clearly see it. You're now standing in the shadow of Auburn Prison on a muggy August morning in 1890, where one of the darkest applications of electrical technology is about to make history. Inside these grim walls, convicted murderer William Kemmler will become the first human being to be legally executed by electricity in a device that will soon gain the nickname Old Sparky. What makes this moment especially chilling is knowing the hidden role Thomas Edison played in bringing this moment to fruition and the commercial motivations behind his involvement. The road to the world's first electric execution began 2 years earlier, in 1888, when New York State established a commission to investigate more humane alternatives to hanging. The timing was no coincidence. It coincided perfectly with Edison's propaganda campaign against alternating current. When the commission approached Edison for technical advice, he saw an opportunity too perfect to ignore. In testimony to the commission, Edison presents himself as a reluctant expert, offering humanitarian guidance. He soberly informs them that while direct current could certainly kill, alternating current would do so more efficiently and with less suffering. What he doesn't mention is his commercial interest in associating Westinghouse's AC with death. His recommendations are specific and detailed. Use AC current, at least 1,000 volts, with electrodes attached to the head and spine. He even helpfully suggests that the state should purchase alternating machines manufactured principally in this country by Geo Westinghouse. Behind the scenes, Edison provides more than just advice. He grants Harold Brown, still secretly on Edison's payroll, access to his laboratory to conduct experiments determining optimal voltages for electrocution. These experiments, using stray dogs and cats as test subjects, are methodically documented in laboratory notebooks. In some entries, the animal's suffering is described in clinical detail. Animals shivered for some time after current was turned off, and violent contortions appear repeatedly. These notebooks reveal the cold calculation behind what is publicly presented as a humanitarian project. Westinghouse, immediately recognizing Edison's strategy, refuses to sell generators for execution purposes and even funds legal appeals for Kemmler, arguing that electrical execution constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. When prisons cannot purchase Westinghouse equipment directly, Edison helps arrange for the acquisition of used Westinghouse generators through third parties, sometimes paying premium prices to ensure the right brand of equipment is used in the executions. A fascinating detail that doesn't make most history books. Edison and his team actually designed much of the first electric chair's specific components, including the leather restraints, electrode caps, and switching mechanisms. While maintaining public distance from the project, Edison's fingerprints are quite literally all over the device. His laboratory notebooks contain sketches and technical specifications for various components, revealing his direct involvement in creating the execution apparatus. On the morning of Kemmler's execution, August 6, 1890, 17 witnesses gather to observe what they've been told will be a quick, painless death. The condemned man is led into the execution chamber, strapped into the wooden chair, and fitted with electrodes on his head and back. When asked for last words, Kemmler calmly states, "Well, I wish everyone good luck in this world, and I think I am going to a good place, and the papers have been saying a lot of stuff that isn't so." At 6:43 a.m., the executioner throws the switch. What follows is a gruesome scene that fails spectacularly to demonstrate the humaneness of electrical execution. The initial 17-second shock appears to kill Kemmler, but as the current is turned off, witnesses notice he is still breathing. "Great God, he is alive!" shouted the executioner, this time for over a minute. Kemmler's blood vessels rupture under his skin, his bodily fluids boil, and the room fills with the smell of burning flesh. One witness faints, while others turn away. The next day's newspapers describe the execution. The New York Times reports that it was far worse than hanging and a disgrace to civilization. Westinghouse, when asked about the execution, remarks, "They would have done better using an axe." Rather than demonstrating the dangers of AC power as Edison hoped, the botched execution mainly generates debate about capital punishment itself. Nevertheless, Edison considers the electric chair a public relations success. For years afterward, newspaper accounts of executions describe criminals being killed by Westinghouse current, precisely the association Edison sought to create. Some prison officials even refer to execution as being Westinghoused, briefly fulfilling Edison's earlier suggestion that his competitor's name should become synonymous with electrocution. What's particularly disturbing about this episode is how it reveals Edison's willingness to facilitate human suffering to achieve commercial ends. The man who claimed his life's purpose was to create technology that improved human existence actively develops technology designed to end human life, not out of any conviction about criminal justice, but as a marketing tactic in a business dispute. The electric chair represents a profound moral compromise for Edison. In private correspondence from this period, he shows little concern about the suffering of execution victims, focusing instead on how the chair might influence public perception of AC power. In one particularly callous note to an associate, he writes that a few executions might result in the abandonment of the use of the dangerous alternating current. Edison's team continues refining the electric chair design after Kemmler's execution, addressing technical problems to make subsequent executions less visibly disturbing. These improvements aren't motivated by humanitarian concerns for the condemned, but by a desire to make electrical execution seem more palatable to the public, and by extension, to reinforce the narrative that AC is inherently deadly. Despite its gruesome debut, the electric chair becomes the standard method of execution in American prisons over the following decades. By 1908, 15 states have adopted electrical execution using designs derived from Edison's original specification. The chair's adoption represents one of the stranger legacies of the War of Currents, a lethal technology that outlives the commercial dispute that spawned it. An often overlooked historical irony. By the time the electric chair becomes widely adopted, Edison has already lost the War of Currents. General Electric, the company that still bears his name, but from which he has been effectively pushed out, adopts AC technology by the mid-1890s. The electric chair continues to kill using alternating current long after AC has become the undisputed standard for power distribution, making Edison's attempt to stigmatize the technology ultimately futile. Historians still debate Edison's true feelings about the electric chair. Did he genuinely believe AC was dangerously unsafe, or was his safety campaign purely a commercial tactic? The most likely answer is that it began as the latter, but eventually became the former. After years of public advocacy against AC, Edison seems to have convinced himself of his own propaganda. His genuine concern for public safety became inextricably entangled with his business interests, creating a self-reinforcing justification for increasingly extreme tactics. The electric chair episode reveals something fundamental about Edison's character that's often missing from simplified historical accounts. The practical, commercially minded inventor who promised to never develop technologies without clear market demand proves willing to create a killing machine, not because anyone wanted it, but because it served his strategic interests. It's a sobering reminder that innovation without ethical constraints can lead even brilliant minds down disturbing paths. As the 1890s progress, Edison gradually distances himself from the electric chair controversy. Having failed to prevent AC's adoption, he turns his attention to new ventures in mining, cement production, and motion pictures. But the ethical questions raised by his involvement in the first electric chair linger, complicating any straightforward narrative about Edison as an unambiguous American hero. Like the chair itself, these questions about the proper relationship between commerce, technology, and human welfare remain with us today. You're now stepping into Edison's legal battlefield, where patents are weapons and courtrooms are the arenas where technological empires rise and fall. By the 1890s, Edison has become as famous for his aggressive patent litigation as for his inventions, wielding intellectual property laws with a ruthlessness that would make modern corporate lawyers nod in appreciation. The man who began his career by circumventing others' patents now builds walls of legal protection around his own technologies. Edison's approach to patents evolved dramatically over his career. As a young telegrapher, he showed little respect for others' intellectual property, freely adapting and improving existing devices. By the time he establishes his laboratory at Menlo Park, however, he becomes almost obsessive about patenting every innovation, no matter how minor. This transformation reveals much about how commercial success changed Edison's perspective on invention itself. What makes Edison's patent strategy particularly fascinating is its comprehensiveness. Rather than simply patenting final products, he systematically files for patents on components, manufacturing processes, and even potential alternative approaches that he has no intention of developing solely to block competitors. By the 1880s, Edison holds patents not just on the incandescent light bulb, but on dozens of manufacturing techniques for producing filaments, glass bulbs, and other components. This creates a formidable thicket of legal protection around his lighting business. A quirky detail rarely mentioned in standard accounts, Edison establishes a dedicated patent room at his West Orange laboratory, where a team of draftsmen, attorneys, and clerks work exclusively on patent applications and litigation. At its peak, this operation processes hundreds of patent documents annually, systematically extending Edison's legal control over numerous technologies. The room features specialized drafting tables, filing systems for tracking application status, and even beds for employees working through the night to meet filing deadlines. Edison's approach to patent enforcement is equally systematic. He employs teams of lawyers whose sole purpose is to identify potential infringements and initiate legal action. These attorneys develop a reputation for aggressive tactics, including filing lawsuits in multiple jurisdictions simultaneously to drain competitors' financial resources. In some cases, Edison's legal team targets not just direct competitors, but customers who purchase allegedly infringing products, creating financial pressure that smaller companies. The most notorious example of Edison's patent warfare centers on the incandescent. Despite not being the first to develop incandescent lighting, Joseph Swan in England and others preceded him, Edison secures broad patents covering key aspects of practical electric lighting. When competitors emerge with their own bulb designs, Edison launches a relentless legal campaign against them. The case of United States Electric Lighting Company provides a particularly illuminating example. This competitor, founded by Hiram Maxim, better known for inventing the machine gun, develops light bulbs that work around Edison's specific patents while still providing effective illumination. Edison sues them in 1885, initiating litigation that drags on for nearly 6 years. The extended legal battle drains USELC's resources, eventually forcing them to sell to Westinghouse, who continues fighting the case. What's remarkable about this litigation is its duration and cost. The light bulb patent case eventually reaches the Supreme Court, with both sides spending millions in today's dollars on legal fees. Edison ultimately prevails in 1892 when the court rules that his 1880 patent covers essentially all practical incandescent lamps with carbon filaments, regardless of specific design variations. This victory gives Edison's company a legal monopoly on incandescent lighting in America until the patent expires in 1894. Historians still debate the ethics of Edison's patent strategies. On one hand, he invested enormous resources in developing practical electric lighting and arguably deserved protection for this investment. On the other hand, his broad patents potentially slowed innovation by preventing others from improving lighting technology. The light bulb patent case represents an early example of a question that still plagues modern patent law. Where is the line between protecting legitimate innovation and stifling competition? Edison's most ethically problematic patent tactics emerge in the motion picture industry. After his laboratory develops early movie cameras and projection systems, Edison obtains patents covering key aspects of film technology. Rather than simply enforcing these patents against direct competitors, he uses them to control the entire film industry through the Motion Picture Patents Company, commonly known as the Edison Trust. Established in 1908, the Edison Trust brings together the major film producers and equipment manufacturers of the era, including some former competitors, in a comprehensive attempt to monopolize the American film industry. The trust requires producers to pay licensing fees, dictates which theaters can show films, and restricts the length and content of movies. Independent filmmakers who refuse to join face harassment, confiscation of equipment, and lawsuits. Some of the trust's enforcement tactics border on the criminal. Edison employs teams of thugs, often off-duty police officers, who raid independent film studios and theaters, destroying equipment and confiscating film. These Edison men become so notorious that independent filmmakers begin posting lookouts to warn of their approach. As one independent producer later recalled, it was not uncommon to finish a scene with actors running in all directions and cameras being hurriedly hidden before the trust detectives arrived. The trust's heavy-handed tactics ultimately backfire spectacularly. To escape Edison's patent enforcement, independent filmmakers begin relocating to Southern California, far from Edison's East Coast operations and conveniently close to the Mexican border for a quick escape if Edison men appear. This migration establishes Hollywood as the center of American filmmaking, an ironic outcome of Edison's attempt to control the industry from New Jersey. What's particularly interesting about this period is how Edison's personality shapes his business tactics. His famous stubbornness and certainty in his own correctness, traits that served him well when persisting through thousands of failed experiments, express themselves as an unwillingness to compromise in business disputes. While many patent disagreements could be resolved through licensing agreements or settlements, Edison often pursues total victory, accepting nothing less than competitors' complete surrender or bankruptcy. This winner-takes-all approach occasionally blinds Edison to potentially beneficial collaborations. When young inventor Lee DeForest develops the Audion tube, a crucial technology for the future of electronics and radio, Edison dismisses it as worthless, rather than exploring potential applications for his own businesses. This dismissal represents a significant missed opportunity, as the Audion becomes a foundation of the electronic age. Edison's reputation for ruthless patent enforcement affects his personal relationships as well. Whereas earlier in his career he freely exchanged ideas with fellow inventors, by the 1890s, many innovators avoid sharing their work with him, fearing he might claim their ideas as his own or use his patent operation against them. This isolation gradually reduces Edison's awareness of cutting-edge developments outside his own laboratory. A telling example of how Edison's patent aggression affects his legacy comes from his conflict with Italian inventor Guglielmo Marconi over radio technology. When Marconi develops practical wireless telegraphy in the late 1890s, Edison attempts to block him by claiming priority based on his own earlier experiments. Although Edison had indeed conducted some wireless communication tests, he had never developed them into a practical system. The patent conflict between the men turns personal, with Edison dismissing Marconi as a good fellow with his cork helmet who happened to hit upon something. By the early 1900s, Edison's patent wars begin to damage his public image. Newspaper coverage increasingly portrays him not as the heroic individual inventor, but as a monopolist using legal tactics to crush smaller competitors. A 1903 editorial in Electrical World captures this shifting perception. The policy of depending upon the courts instead of upon the laboratory for protection against competition has never in the long run benefited any art or any organization. As Edison enters his 60s, his direct involvement in patent litigation gradually decreases, though his companies continue aggressive enforcement policies. His attention shifts to new ventures, including cement production, storage batteries, and synthetic rubber, where he hopes to recapture the innovative spirit of his earlier years. But the pattern established in his electrical and motion picture businesses, innovation followed by aggressive legal protection, remains consistent throughout these later endeavors. Edison's complicated relationship with patents reveals much about the evolution of American innovation itself. The young Edison, who freely built upon others' ideas, represents an older, more open model of technological development. The older Edison, who aggressively enforces patent monopolies, foreshadows our modern era of intellectual property wars. Between these two versions of Edison lies a fundamental question that still challenges us today. How do we balance protecting innovation with encouraging the free flow of ideas? You're now entering a dimly lit kinetoscope parlor in 1894, dropping a nickel into a wooden cabinet and peering through a small viewing window to watch 20 seconds of flickering images, perhaps a strongman flexing, acrobats performing, or a dancer twirling. This simple entertainment experience represents another of Edison's transformative innovations, motion pictures. Yet, as you'll discover, Edison's role in creating cinema reveals the same complex mix of genuine innovation, exaggerated credit, and ruthless business tactics that characterized his other ventures. The story begins in 1888, when Edison returns from a trip to Europe having met French inventor Étienne Jules Marey, who showed him early experiments with sequential photography. Inspired, Edison assigns his talented assistant, William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, to develop a motion picture system. Edison's instructions are characteristically practical. The device should be coin-operated for commercial appeal and should work with his phonograph to create talking pictures. What follows is a classic example of Edison's operational model. While he provides the initial concept and funding, Dixon does the actual heavy lifting of invention. Over the next 3 years, Dixon, not Edison, solves the crucial technical challenges, developing flexible celluloid film strips, creating a mechanism to move film through a camera at precise intervals, and designing the kinetoscope viewing cabinet. Yet when the technology is unveiled to the public in 1893, it's presented as an Edison invention, with Dixon receiving minimal acknowledgement. This pattern of Edison claiming primary credit for his employees' innovations isn't unique to motion pictures. Throughout his career, Edison insists that patents from his laboratory list him as the sole or primary inventor, regardless of who developed the key insights. As one laboratory worker later commented, Edison is in reality a collective noun and means the work of many men. What makes the film technology case particularly noteworthy is how thoroughly Dixon's contributions have been erased from popular history. School children learn that Edison invented movies, but few people recognize Dixon's name, despite his role in solving the crucial technical problems. When Dixon eventually leaves Edison's employment in 1895, after disputes over credit and compensation, he joins competitors to develop projection technology Edison had initially dismissed as having limited commercial potential. The first films produced at Edison's Black Maria studio, the world's first purpose-built movie production facility, reveal much about early cinema's appeal. These short clips feature vaudeville performers, athletes, dancers, and scenes from everyday life. A quirky detail rarely mentioned in sanitized accounts, some of the earliest Edison films featured scantily clad women and boxing matches, content considered somewhat risque for the Victorian era. Edison recognized early on that sensationalism sold tickets, establishing a pattern the film industry still follows. The Black Maria studio itself represents an ingenious solution to early filmmaking challenges. Built in 1893 at Edison's West Orange laboratory, this peculiar structure resembles a police paddy wagon, hence its nickname, and is covered in black tar paper. Its most distinctive feature is a roof that opens along a central hinge, allowing sunlight to illuminate the interior. The entire building rotates on a circular track to follow the sun throughout the day, a necessary feature in the era before electric lighting was powerful enough for filming. Edison's approach to film content reveals his practical business sense. Rather than viewing movies as an art form, he sees them purely as commercial entertainment. When asked about the potential cultural impact of cinema, Edison reportedly responds, "We're in the show business." This commercial focus leads him to produce content with mass appeal, physical comedy, celebrities, exotic scenes, and simple narratives that require no translation for international audiences. What's particularly fascinating about Edison's film business is how quickly he moves to control the entire industry. By 1908, having secured patents on camera technology, film format, and projection systems, he forms the Motion Picture Patents Company, the infamous Edison Trust, with other major film producers. This trust attempts to monopolize every aspect of filmmaking, requiring producers to pay licensing fees, dictating which theaters can show films, and restricting the length and content of the trust's enforcement methods border on the criminal. Edison employs teams of thugs who raid independent film studios and theaters, destroying equipment and confiscating film. These aggressive tactics ultimately backfire spectacularly. To escape Edison's reach, independent filmmakers begin relocating to Southern California, establishing what will become Hollywood as the center of American filmmaking. In a supreme historical irony, Edison's attempt to control the film industry from New Jersey inadvertently creates its permanent home on the opposite coast. A particularly revealing episode occurs in 1902 when French filmmaker Georges Méliès releases A Trip to the Moon, a groundbreaking science fiction film featuring innovative special effects. The film becomes an international sensation and is promptly pirated by Edison's company, which makes unauthorized copies and distributes them throughout America without paying Méliès a cent. When confronted about this theft, Edison's representatives argue that since Méliès never properly filed for American copyright protection, they have no legal obligation to compensate him. This incident highlights the stark hypocrisy in Edison's approach to intellectual property, aggressively protecting his own while freely appropriating others. Edison's understanding of film's commercial potential proves remarkably limited in certain ways. He initially resists feature-length films, believing audiences lack the attention span for movies longer than 10 to 15 minutes. He dismisses narrative storytelling as unnecessarily complex, preferring simple scenes that require no plot understanding. And, perhaps most significantly, he fails to recognize the artistic potential of the medium, viewing it as merely a technological novelty rather than a new form of creative expression. By the 1910s, Edison's influence over the film industry begins to wane. The Supreme Court dissolves the Edison Trust in 1915, ruling it violates antitrust laws. Innovative filmmakers like D.W. Griffith demonstrate the artistic possibilities Edison had overlooked, developing sophisticated editing techniques, narrative structures, and emotional storytelling. The Hollywood studio system emerges as the new center of film production, leaving Edison's East Coast operations increasingly irrelevant. What's particularly ironic about Edison's diminishing role in cinema is that it stems largely from his own personality traits. The same stubborn insistence on controlling all aspects of a technology that had served him well in the electrical industry proves disastrous in the creative realm of filmmaking. By attempting to restrict artistic expression through technical and legal control, he drives the most innovative filmmakers away from his influence and into new, more open creative environments. Despite these limitations, Edison's contributions to early cinema remain significant. The basic technology he and his team developed, particularly the 35mm film format, remained the industry standard for over a century. The studio system he pioneered, with its specialized roles and industrial approach to creativity, became the template for Hollywood production. And his early recognition of film's commercial potential helped transform a scientific curiosity into a global entertainment medium. Edison's relationship with cinema encapsulates the contradictions that define his later career. He demonstrates genuine technical innovation while exaggerating his personal contributions. He shows remarkable commercial vision while fundamentally misunderstanding the medium's artistic potential. He creates a new industry while simultaneously stifling its development through monopolistic practices. Like Edison himself, the legacy is complex, neither the unblemished achievement of conventional narratives nor a simple story of theft and monopolization. As Edison's direct involvement in the film industry fades in the 1910s, he turns his attention to new ventures, particularly developing storage batteries for electric vehicles and attempting to create synthetic rubber. But his formative influence on cinema, both positive and negative, remains embedded in the DNA of the film industry even today, from Hollywood's location to the technical standards that shaped a century of movie making. Though rarely acknowledged as such, Edison's most enduring cultural legacy may be not the light bulb, but the flickering images that continue to captivate audiences worldwide. You're observing Edison in his 60s and 70s, a period when the once revolutionary inventor struggles to maintain relevance in a rapidly changing technological landscape. The early 20th century brings a profound shift in innovation, from the mechanical and electrical technologies Edison mastered to the electronic and theoretical sciences that increasingly define progress. For a man who proudly proclaimed his disinterest in mathematical theory and academic knowledge, this transition proves particularly challenging. By 1900, Edison has largely withdrawn from direct management of his electrical businesses. General Electric, the company that bears his name, but from which he was effectively pushed aside during its 1892 formation, has embraced the AC technology he once fought against. The phonograph business faces increasing competition from newer designs. His motion picture patents are being challenged in court. Looking for new worlds to conquer, Edison turns his attention to a series of ambitious projects that yield mixed results at best. One of Edison's major late-career focuses is developing improved storage batteries. Recognizing the potential of electric vehicles, which in the early 1900s actually outnumber gasoline-powered cars, Edison works to create a battery that overcomes the limitations of lead-acid designs. After years of characteristic trial-and-error experimentation, he develops the nickel-iron battery, which offers better durability, though less power, than lead-acid alternatives. Edison promotes this technology with typical bombast, declaring it will make the electric vehicle supreme. What Edison fails to anticipate is how quickly internal combustion engines would improve, particularly after Henry Ford introduces the affordable Model T in 1908. While Edison's batteries find applications in railroad signaling, industrial equipment, and early submarine power systems, they never revolutionized transportation, as he predicted. The Edison Storage Battery Company remains profitable, but never achieves the transformative impact of his earlier innovation. A particularly revealing episode from this period occurs in 1912, when Edison attempts to develop an electric self-starter for Ford automobile. Despite his friendship with Henry Ford, who considers Edison a hero and mentor, the project fails to produce a commercially viable product. In a telling development, the successful electric starter that eventually becomes standard in automobiles is developed by Charles Kettering for General Motors, a competitor with more sophisticated electronic engineering capabilities than Edison's operation. This pattern of promising but ultimately disappointing ventures characterizes Edison's later years. He invests heavily in developing machinery to extract iron from low-grade ore, establishing the Edison Portland Cement Company. The venture produces cement used in notable projects, including Yankee Stadium, but never achieves the profitability Edison envisioned. His concrete house, an attempt to create affordable, poured-in-place concrete homes for working families, proved too expensive and impractical for mass production despite their innovative design. What's particularly interesting about this period is how Edison's public image and actual achievements increasingly diverge. While newspapers still herald each new Edison project as potentially revolutionary, his laboratory produces fewer commercially successful innovations. Edison remains a celebrity, perhaps America's most famous living inventor, but his practical impact on technology diminishes as younger engineers and scientists with formal education in emerging fields take center stage. A quirky detail that reveals much about Edison's declining technical relevance. When Guglielmo Marconi develops practical wireless telegraphy, radio, in the late 1890s, Edison dismisses it as having limited commercial potential. Despite his own earlier experiments with wireless transmission, Edison fails to recognize radio's transformative possibilities. By the time commercial radio broadcasting begins in the 1920s, Edison, once America's most forward-thinking technologist, finds himself bewildered by its popularity, reportedly asking, "Who the hell wants to hear actors talk?" The outbreak of World War I in 1914 provides Edison an opportunity to demonstrate his patriotic credentials and potentially recapture his innovative momentum. When the U.S. government establishes the Naval Consulting Board to develop military technology, Edison is appointed chairman, a role that seems to acknowledge his preeminent status in American innovation. Yet, in practice, his contributions to the war effort prove limited. His proposal for detecting submarines using sound waves shows genuine insight, but is developed into practical sonar systems by others with more technical expertise in acoustics. What makes this period poignant is watching Edison struggle with the changing nature of innovation itself. The self-taught inventor who relied on intuition and empirical testing finds himself in a world increasingly dominated by theoretical physics, advanced mathematics, and formal engineering education, precisely the academic approaches he had proudly rejected throughout his career. While Einstein publishes his theory of general relativity and Niels Bohr develops quantum models of the atom, Edison continues testing materials in his laboratory, using methods that have changed little since the 1870s. Edison's personal life during these years reflects some of the same contradictions. In 1907, at age 60, he moves into Glenmont, a grand 29-room Queen Anne mansion in West Orange, New Jersey, with his second wife, Mina, and their children. The estate, with its formal gardens and elegant furnishings, seems at odds with Edison's self-cultivated image as a simple, practical man, uninterested in luxury. Yet Edison spends relatively little time enjoying this domestic splendor, continuing to work long hours at his nearby laboratory well into his 70s. A particularly revealing glimpse into the aging Edison comes from a 1921 camping trip organized by his friend Henry Ford. This now famous excursion brings together Edison, Ford, naturalist John Burroughs, and tire magnate Harvey Firestone for a rustic vacation documented by photographers and film crews. The publicity photographs show Edison relaxing in the wilderness, suggesting a man enjoying well-earned leisure after decades of work. The reality, according to accounts from those present, is that Edison continues conducting experiments even while camping, testing local plants for potential rubber content and discussing technical problems late into the night. As Edison enters his final decade, his declining hearing, a condition present since youth but worsening with age, increasingly isolates him from normal conversation. Family members and close associates communicate with him through a form of fingerspelling on his palm, while journalists granted interviews must submit questions in writing. This physical isolation perhaps contributes to Edison's growing disconnection from contemporary technological developments as casual exchanges of information become more difficult. In these later years, Edison occasionally reveals flashes of the innovative thinking that defined his earlier career. In 1927, as the Great Depression looms, he correctly predicts that America's economic future lies in research and new product development rather than merely expanding existing industries. He advocates for greater investment in scientific education and research laboratories, ironically embracing the formal approaches to innovation he had once dismissed. Yet, alongside these forward-looking insights, Edison sometimes expresses views that reveal his increasing distance from modern scientific understanding. He maintains his skepticism about Einstein's theories despite their growing acceptance among physicists. He dismisses quantum mechanics as unnecessarily complex. And he continues to express doubt about alternating current safety decades after it has become the universal standard for electrical distribution. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of Edison's later years is his relationship with former rival Nikola Tesla. While Edison accumulates wealth and accolades despite his waning technical relevance, Tesla, whose AC system powers the modern world, lives in increasing poverty and obscurity in New York hotels. When asked about Tesla in a rare 1926 interview, Edison offers grudging acknowledgement of his contributions but adds dismissively, "He's a nice fellow, but he's too impractical." Navici. The contrast between the two men's fates, Edison celebrated despite his technical misjudgments, Tesla marginalized despite his vindicated vision, highlights the sometimes arbitrary nature of historical recognition. As the 1920s progress, Edison's health gradually declines. Diabetes and stomach ailments reduce his legendary energy, though he continues working on various projects, particularly attempting to develop domestic sources of rubber, a strategic material largely imported at the time. In October 1931, Edison falls into a coma at Glenmont. As he lays dying, newspapers around the world prepare obituaries for the man who, despite his later setbacks, remains America's most famous inventor and a symbol of technological progress itself. You're standing among the crowd gathered outside the Edison Laboratory in West Orange on the evening of October 21, 1931. The air is heavy with a sense of collective loss as news spreads that Thomas Edison has died at age 84 at his Glenmont estate. President Herbert Hoover has just asked Americans to dim their lights at 10 p.m. as a national tribute to the man who helped illuminate the world, a symbolic gesture that captures Edison's most enduring public legacy. Edison's death triggers an outpouring of public mourning rarely seen for a non-political figure. Newspapers worldwide print extensive obituaries, most focusing on his light bulb, phonograph, and early motion pictures, while glossing over controversies and failures. The New York Times runs a front-page headline declaring, "Edison, benefactor of mankind, dies," while electrical companies throughout America dim their power outputs for 1 minute in tribute. Even as the nation struggles with the Great Depression, Edison's passing commands attention as the end of an era in American innovation. What's particularly fascinating about the immediate response to Edison's death is how quickly the sanitization of his legacy begins. Obituaries emphasize his rags-to-riches story, his perseverance through thousands of failed experiments, and his transformation of daily life through practical inventions. Missing from most accounts are the patent battles, the dubious business tactics, the animal electrocutions, and the often ruthless treatment of competitors. Within days of his passing, the complex, contradictory man is already being transformed into a simpler, more inspirational symbol of American ingenuity. The funeral arrangements reflect Edison's unique status in American culture. After lying in state at the laboratory where he spent so much of his life, Edison's body is transported to the final service in Glenmont. While the ceremony itself is private, crowds line the procession route and radio stations broadcast portions of the service nationwide. Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, John D. Rockefeller Jr., and President Hoover's representatives attend, underscoring Edison's connections to America's industrial and political elite. A quirky and little-known detail about Edison's death reveals his friend Henry Ford's unusual sentimental attachment. According to witnesses, Ford captures Edison's last breath in a test tube, believing it might contain the inventor's departing soul. This strange memento is eventually displayed at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, a peculiar relic that seems fitting for a man whose own approach to innovation often blended science with spectacle. The immediate posthumous debate about Edison's legacy reveals competing visions of the inventor and his significance. Scientific journals offer more measured assessments than popular media, acknowledging that many Edison inventions were actually developed by his employees or built upon others' prior work. These publications also note that Edison's most significant achievement may have been not any single device, but the creation of the industrial research laboratory model that transforms how innovation happens. Electrical industry publications strike a particularly interesting tone. While acknowledging Edison's foundational role in their field, many tacitly recognize that his stubborn commitment to direct current represented a significant misstep. Articles carefully praise his early work on electric lighting while avoiding detailed discussion of the war of currents, an episode still embarrassing to many in the industry who had witnessed Edison's more questionable tactic. Foreign assessments of Edison's legacy often differ from American perspectives in revealing ways. European publications, while acknowledging his achievements, more readily credit others like Swan with parallel or prior development of key technologies. Japanese newspapers, where Edison was particularly revered, focus on his work ethic and perseverance as models for their own industrial development. Soviet commentary, by contrast, criticizes Edison as an exemplar of capitalist exploitation, using others' labor to build personal wealth while claiming sole credit. The most interesting immediate response comes from Nikola Tesla, Edison's former employee and longtime rival. When approached by reporters for a comment on Edison's passing, Tesla offers a surprisingly generous assessment. He had a true genius for finding the right solution of practical difficulties. He was more responsible than anyone else for creating industrial America. No one has done more to benefit humanity. This gracious statement from the man most directly harmed by Edison's business tactics reveals Tesla's character and perhaps explains why history initially favored the more aggressive self-promoter over the more reserved genius. In the months following Edison's death, the first wave of biographies appears, most taking a hagiographic approach that establishes the foundation of the Edison myth. These accounts typically portray Edison as a largely self-taught genius whose innovations sprang primarily from his own mind rather than collaborative effort. They minimize controversies, frame ethical lapses as necessary business decisions, and establish the narrative of Edison as an uncomplicated American hero that would dominate public understanding for decades. What's particularly noteworthy about this early myth-making is how thoroughly it obscures Edison's collaborative approach to innovation. Despite Edison's own frequent claims of individual genius, his greatest achievements came through the work of teams he assembled and directed. The phonograph, light bulb, motion picture technology, and other key innovations all involve significant contributions from employees whose names have largely faded from public knowledge. Men like Charles Batchelor, William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, and Francis Upton, without whom many Edison inventions might never have existed. The legal battles over Edison's estate reveal the vast commercial empire he had built. At the time of his death, Edison holds 1,093 U.S. patents and interests in numerous companies manufacturing everything from batteries to cement to motion pictures. While his personal wealth isn't as enormous as contemporaries like Rockefeller or Carnegie, partly due to several expensive failed ventures in his later years, Edison leaves an estate valued at around $12 million, equivalent to about $220 million today, most of which goes to his widow Mina and their children. The disposition of Edison's laboratory and papers becomes a matter of public interest, with Henry Ford eventually purchasing many of Edison's papers and equipment for preservation in what becomes the Henry Ford Museum and Greenfield Village in Michigan. This preservation effort, while valuable for historical purposes, further contributes to the Edison mythology by presenting his workspace and methods in a carefully curated fashion that emphasizes individual genius over collaborative enterprise. In the years immediately following Edison's death, a battle emerges over control of his narrative and legacy. His family, particularly son Charles Edison, who later becomes governor of New Jersey and Secretary of the Navy, works to protect and promote a positive image of the inventor. Former employees offer more complex accounts, with some, like rueful Secretary Alfred Tate, publishing memoirs that present a more human Edison, with flaws and contradictions alongside his genuine achievements. Academic assessments in the 1930s and 1940s begin challenging simplified portrayals of Edison as the sole creator of his innovations. Historians identify precursors to many Edison technologies, document the contributions of his laboratory staff, and place his work in the broader context of late 19th century technological development. These more nuanced perspectives, however, initially have limited impact on public perception, which remains dominated by the heroic narrative established in popular biographies and school textbooks. One of the most interesting aspects of Edison's posthumous legacy is how thoroughly the controversies surrounding him fade from public consciousness. Within a decade of his death, few Americans associate Edison with electrocuting animals, aggressive patent litigation, or monopolistic business practices. Instead, he becomes enshrined as an uncomplicated symbol of American innovation and entrepreneurship. His image used to inspire school children, sell commercial products, and promote the idea that individual genius and hard work can transform the world. This simplified legacy serves particular cultural and political purposes in mid-20th century America. During World War II and the subsequent Cold War, Edison's story is employed as propaganda demonstrating American ingenuity and free enterprise in contrast to collectivist Soviet approaches. Educational films and children's books present Edison as the quintessential American hero, independent, practical, commercially successful, and motivated by service to humanity rather than purely financial gain. The establishment of the Thomas A. Edison Foundation in 1946 further institutionalizes this carefully managed legacy. The foundation sponsors educational programs, awards, and publications that promote a positive, inspirational image of Edison while minimizing more controversial aspects of his career. This organization, supported by both the Edison family and major corporations with ties to his innovations, helps cement the inventor's place in American cultural mythology as an uncomplicated symbol of progress through individual achievement. As you watch mourners file past Edison's body in those October days of 1931, you're witnessing not just the end of a remarkable life, but the beginning of a contested legacy, a process of myth-making and reassessment that continues into our own time. The complex, contradictory man is already transforming into something simpler but perhaps less true, an icon rather than a human being, a symbol rather than a person. The real Edison, with all his brilliant insights, commercial instincts, ethical compromises, and human flaws, is fading away even as his public image becomes immortalized. You're now stepping into the present day, where Thomas Edison's legacy continues to evolve, as each generation reinterprets his achievements and controversies through its own values and priorities. Nearly a century after his death, Edison remains perhaps the most recognized American inventor, his name still synonymous with innovation and technological progress. Yet the simplified, heroic narrative that dominated much of the 20th century has gradually given way to a more nuanced, complex understanding of the man and his work. Modern reassessments of Edison begin in earnest during the 1970s and 1980s as historians of technology adopt more sophisticated approach. Rather than focusing on great men working in isolation, scholars increasingly examine the social, economic, and collaborative context in which technologies develop. This shift naturally leads to a reevaluation of Edison, whose success relied heavily on teams of engineers and scientists working under his direction. What emerges from this scholarship is a portrait of Edison not primarily as an individual inventor, but as a systems builder and research manager, perhaps the first modern R&D director. His genius lay not just in technical insights, but in creating organizational structures that could systematically generate and commercialize innovations. Edison's greatest invention, from this perspective, was the Industrial Research Laboratory itself, the model that later evolved into facilities like Bell Labs, Park, and corporate research centers worldwide. The resurgence of interest in Nikola Tesla beginning in the 1990s further complicates Edison's legacy. After decades of relative obscurity, Tesla reemerges in popular culture as Edison's brilliant, underappreciated rival, a narrative that gains particular traction in Internet culture. Books, films, and websites contrast the visionary, ethical Tesla with the pragmatic, sometimes ruthless Edison. This Tesla revival, while correcting historical neglect of an important innovator, sometimes overcorrects by demonizing Edison in order to elevate his rival. A particularly interesting aspect of modern Edison reassessment is how differently various professional communities view him. Electrical engineers often hold complex, ambivalent views, respecting Edison's practical achievements, while recognizing that his stubborn commitment to direct current represented a significant technical misstep. Business schools, by contrast, frequently celebrate Edison as a model entrepreneur who successfully commercialized inventions through effective organization and marketing. Science educators value his demonstration of empirical methods, but sometimes criticize his dismissal of theoretical approaches. Edison's personal traits receive similar reassessment through contemporary lenses. His legendary workaholic tendencies, once universally praised as demonstrating American determination, are now sometimes viewed as dysfunctional, contributing to his failed marriages and distant relationships with his children. His treatment of employees demanding 80-plus hour work weeks while claiming sole credit for their innovations, conflicts with modern workplace values. Even his famous trial-and-error method, testing thousands of materials for light bulb filaments, appears to modern eyes as inefficient compared to more theory-driven approaches. Perhaps the most significant shift in Edison's modern legacy comes from changing views about what constitutes significant innovation itself. In an era increasingly concerned with sustainability and social impact, Edison's focus on commercial applications and market success seems less universally admirable. Contemporary innovation narratives often celebrate those who develop solutions to humanitarian challenges, environmental problems, or social inequities, areas where Edison showed limited interest compared to profitable consumer technology. An overlooked aspect of Edison's legacy that receives growing attention is his complex relationship with environmental impact. On one hand, his electrical innovations ultimately reduced urban pollution by replacing gas lighting and providing alternatives to steam power. On the other hand, his consumer-focused approach helped establish patterns of resource consumption and planned obsolescence that contribute to modern environmental challenges. Edison himself showed occasional environmental foresight, expressing concerns about deforestation and fossil fuel depletion as early as 1910. Yet his solutions typically involve developing new technologies rather than changing consumption patterns. Edison's treatment of intellectual property also receives critical reassessment in the digital age. His aggressive patent enforcement and creation of the motion picture patents company, the Edison Trust, appear to many modern observers as innovation stifling rather than innovation protecting. In an era debating open-source software, patent trolls, and copyright term extension, Edison's monopolistic approach to controlling technologies through legal means rather than continued innovation feels increasingly problematic. Yet, defenders note that without such protections, the massive investment required for his research laboratory might never have been financially viable. A quirky aspect of Edison's contemporary legacy is his adoption as both hero and villain by different political perspectives. Conservative commentators often celebrate Edison as exemplifying entrepreneurial capitalism and individual achievement without government intervention. Progressive voices sometimes criticize him as representing monopolistic business practices and the myth of individual genius that obscures collaborative reality. Libertarian perspectives praise his independent spirit while criticizing his use of patent law to restrict competition. Each group finds in Edison elements that support their preferred narratives about innovation and commerce. The restoration of Edison's West Orange Laboratory as a National Historic Site in the 1950s creates a physical space where these competing interpretations play out. Early exhibitions emphasized Edison's individual genius and celebrated his achievements without significant critical context. Modern presentations acknowledge the collaborative nature of his work, the contributions of key employees, and controversies surrounding some of his business practices. This evolution reflects broader shifts in how public history addresses complex historical figures, with both admirable achievements and problematic aspects. Hollywood's treatment of Edison similarly evolves over time. Early films like 1940's Young Tom Edison, starring Mickey Rooney, and Edison the Man, with Spencer Tracy, present hagiographic accounts focusing on his perseverance and achievement. The 2017 film The Current War offers a more nuanced portrayal, depicting Edison's brilliant innovations alongside his ruthless business tactics during the AC/DC battle with Tesla and Westinghouse. This shift mirrors broader cultural tendencies toward more complex, morally ambiguous depictions of historical figures. educational materials show perhaps the most dramatic evolution in Edison's portrayal. Elementary school textbooks from the mid-20th century present Edison as an uncomplicated American hero whose 1,093 patents demonstrated the power of individual genius and determination. Modern educational resources increasingly acknowledge the collaborative nature of innovation, mention controversies like animal electrocutions, and place Edison within broader technological and social contexts rather than portraying him as a singular genius working in isolation. What's particularly interesting about contemporary Edison reassessment is how it reflects changing understandings of innovation itself. The 20th century largely embraced a great man theory of technological development, with individual geniuses driving progress through brilliant insights. Today's innovation narratives emphasize systems, teams, diversity of perspective, and the social context that enable creative breakthroughs. Edison sits at the intersection of these models, an individual who created systems for collaborative innovation, while insisting on personal credit. Perhaps the most thoughtful modern takes on Edison acknowledge both his genuine achievements and his troubling contradictions. He democratized technologies like recorded sound and electric light, transforming daily life for millions. He established organizational models for innovation that continue to influence research and development worldwide. Yet he also engaged in dubious ethical practices, downplayed others' contributions, and sometimes prioritized market dominance over optimal technological solutions. The ultimate contemporary verdict on Edison might be that he embodied both the virtues and flaws of American innovation itself: practical, commercially focused, endlessly optimistic about technological solutions, sometimes ethically compromised, and often more concerned with market success than broader social or environmental impacts. His legacy serves as both inspiration and cautionary tale, demonstrating the transformative power of systematic innovation while raising important questions about how we develop and deploy technologies in society. As you reflect on Edison's journey from impoverished telegraph operator to global icon, what emerges is neither the unblemished hero of early biographies nor the corporate villain of some recent portrayals. Instead, you see a brilliant, flawed human being whose achievements and failings continue to inform our understanding of innovation, entrepreneurship, and the complex relationship between technology and society. The Wizard of Menlo Park, with all his contradictions, remains a mirror in which we see reflected our own ambivalent relationship with technological progress. Drive it forward. As you drift toward sleep, the story of Thomas Edison gradually fades into the gentle darkness surrounding you. The tale of ambition, innovation, rivalry, and legacy settles into your mind like dust in an old laboratory, each particle containing a fragment of a complex life that helped shape our modern world. The tension between Edison's brilliant achievements and troubling tactics dissolves into a more nuanced understanding that even our greatest innovators contain multitudes of contradictions. Perhaps what makes Edison's story so compelling is precisely this humanity, the recognition that genius and flaws can coexist in the same remarkable mind. As your consciousness begins to blur at the edges, you might find yourself wondering about the technology surrounding you in your own bedroom, the electric light that you've just switched off, the recorded music that perhaps played softly as you prepared for sleep, the screen on which you watched this very video. Each traces its lineage, at least in part, back to that bustling laboratory in New Jersey where a partially deaf inventor and his team of muckers worked through endless nights. The rivalry between Edison and Tesla, like so many great conflicts throughout history, eventually fades into perspective. Two brilliant men with different visions, each contributing essential elements to our electrical presence. Their human flaws and virtues, their triumphs and failures, all merge into the greater current of technological progress that flows through human history. As sleep approaches, The details of patent battles, corporate maneuvers, and priority disputes recede, leaving behind the simple wonder of human creativity, the spark that jumps between problem and solution, between imagination and reality. This is Edison's most fundamental legacy, not any single invention, but the demonstration that, with sufficient persistence, organization, and imagination, the seemingly impossible can become commonplace. Rest now with the understanding that the story you've heard tonight is neither definitive hero worship nor cynical debunking, but something closer to truth, a human story of remarkable achievement intertwined with human limitation. Like Edison himself, we continue to work in partial light, seeking to illuminate our world while navigating our own contradictions. Sweet dreams.